Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. This week, something a little bit different. Something we've not done, I think, on multiple fronts. Never mind some video game tunes, but also an instrumental album. I don't think we've done one of those either. So this is going to be make for an interesting week. Chris, my friend, how are you?
I'm good. I've been in touch with my inner nerd this week, just listening to lots of video game related content. So this is exciting. I've been looking forward to having this discussion with you, and this is like kind of cool because it combines two of my loves in the world. Hard rock / heavy metal music and video games, and to me, there's so much. Some of the best music I've ever heard has come from video games, and there's so many great composers and what have you. And so it's kind of cool to kind of take a little break from our usual fare and do something a little bit different. And I think this whole month is going to be a little off the beaten path for the podcast, as we opened with King Diamond, and now we continue on with the Descendants of Erdrick. Oh, I said it right on the first try. Nice. And then you'll have to wait and see what we have in store the rest of the month. But here we go. October is always a little bit of a weird month because of Halloween, so we're embracing it here.
I like it. I like it a lot. For those that are new to the show, consider joining our Patreon. It is one of the best ways you can support the show. The links for the Patreon are at the bottom, and all of our Patreon members are eligible to make requests for future albums as we kind of launch ourselves into the end of 2023 and into 2024. So please consider that, and also likes and follows help other people find us as well. So do consider that if you like what you hear. I like what I heard this week from two different bands, so I feel like I'll segue into a couple of new things that I heard other than Descendants of Erdrick, which I was familiar with. But Eldritch has released their new single, Elegy of Lust, the Italian prog / power metal band that's been around for 25 years or more at this point, but their first single with Alex Giarusso on vocals. Definitely different when you lose the singer after, almost, it's got to be over 30 years at this point, when Terrence Holler left the band kind of out of nowhere very recently. Did you have a chance to listen to this track, Elegy of Lust? What did you think of it?
I listened to it a little bit. I didn't get to hear the whole song, but they're very different style vocalist. It's actually, it reminds me a lot, not in content, but in situation, of Gloryhammer. Except this is a way longer history that Terrence had as a vocalist of this band. Their first album, I believe, came out in the mid-90s, somewhere in the mid-90s around that time. So the reason I make that comparison is just that, like, I felt like the vocalist was such a signature sound of each band, and now you have a different singer who I think also sings in a different style. I think in both cases, a more smooth, a more polished kind of style, not as raspy or and harsh probably isn't the right word, but I don't know. I think you said it best. You said if you go into it and listen to it as if it's like a new band, it's just weird to me. It just doesn't sound like an Eldritch song. Like, to me, like that, they were one of those bands where, for me, the vocalist was the band. Like, I always listen to it, and like hearing Terrence's vocals kind of came first for me, and then like the music came second. Not a lot of bands I feel that way about, but this happens to just be one of them. So I'm gonna have to really spend some time with this song, and I guess with the album's gonna be called Inner Void. I think it's supposed to be coming out before the end of the year. Definitely gonna have to spend some time with that and just see if it clicks. I will say the new Gloryhammer with their new singer has not clicked for me yet. And I don't know, sometimes you just kind of get locked in your mind, like what a band's supposed to sound like, and the vocals are kind of a big part of that, and sometimes it's hard. I couldn't even imagine being a Halloween fan in the 80s and then like switching over to Darius in 94, and like it must have been so jarring. I mean, I got to hear both at the same time. Same with Sabotage with John and Zach, and even Van Halen. Like by the time I was aware, I'd heard both Dream On or not Dream On, Right Now and Dreams, but also Panama and Jump. So like it's interesting kind of being in the thick of it and being there at the time of the change. So I guess we'll see. What else did you listen to?
Well, let me just say, I stand by what I said. If you didn't know who the band was, really good song. Just doesn't sound like Eldritch, right? Like I think they've changed their style a little bit, but they've done this from time to time. They went kind of nu metal in like the early 2000s, and they've kind of experimented, if you will, with their sound. So I like the song a lot. I'm going to listen to the album. Just doesn't, just not Eldritch, right? Like it's just not what I expected. But all in all, I did enjoy the tune. The other band that has a new single out is Spanish thrash band Angelus Apatrida. And for those that are not familiar with this band, you being one of them, I think this is probably the best modern, and I use that term in quotes, thrash band on the planet. I'm not talking about like your Creators and your Megadeths. I'm talking about just like more of a modern thrash band. They had come out with a single about a month ago called Cold. I love this song. I thought it was really, really good. They came out with a single about 3 weeks ago called To Whom It May Concern. The music video for that as well, also very good. And yesterday, as of the time of this recording, they came out with a lyric video for Snob, which was the first song that didn't really hit for me. But the album is getting close. It is due out, I believe, on October 20th, if memory serves. And so I will definitely be checking that out. It is called Aftermath. And if you like modern thrash, you can do a hell of a lot worse than this band. So I want to give this a good listen and see if it cracks its way into my top 50 this year.
Beautiful. I look forward to hearing that. You were right to assume that I was not familiar with that. I want to throw a shout out to our friend Rich, who is a member of our Patreon and a friend of the podcast, and we had made a comment that that you had met up with him in New York City last week, and he has a band from Australia. I actually looked up how to pronounce this name correctly because it was, I knew I was going to butcher it, and I would have if I had said it the way I thought it was, but I looked it up and it's pronounced Taliesin, and they're a prog metal band, at least according to the Metal Archives. I literally 30 minutes ago just grabbed their new album. It's called Disciple. It literally comes out, I think, tomorrow technically, but I guess it is tomorrow in Australia. Huh. So I was able to get it from their Bandcamp page. So I'm looking forward to checking it out. I'm promoting it blindly without having listened to it, but I think you had heard it. So
yeah, I have heard it. It is very, very good. So go out and support your own brothers. If you listen to the podcast, definitely recommend this new album. It's just been officially released as of today, which is 2 days ago when you actually hear this, unless you're a Patreon member who obviously gets it early and ad-free. But yeah, really, really good stuff. I think you're going to enjoy it. I would put it in that accessible prog bucket, which I know hits a sweet spot for you.
Without a doubt. It is... it has been added to my Q4 album folder, and I'll be checking it out. It's my first album of Q4. So
very nice.
I want to mention two other things that aren't particularly new, but in line with what we're going to be talking about this week. In my I don't want to call it research because I didn't really need to do a ton of research on this week, but I just kind of came across some stuff that I found really interesting that kind of parallels the Descendants of Erdrick. There was a band, I don't know if they're still in existence, but they're called Year 200X, and they I had found out that they had done a 10.5 minute cover of the final boss fight from Final Fantasy VI called Dancing Mad, and the guitar player from Descendants of Erdrick, who we'll be talking about, her name is Amanda Lepre, or Lepre. She does actually some vocals on this because there's actually some like operatic vocals that they had used synthesizers for on the Super NES when this game came out, and being that this is like a real, instrumental version of it, it's really, really cool and really well done. It's going to be on my next playlist, volume 20 for 2023, so you can check it out there. But if you want to hear it sooner than that, I recommend it. It's from an album called World of Rune. There's also a really cool Legend of Zelda Link to the Past track on there. So very cool stuff. And another thing I discovered was a band that the flute player from Descendants of Erdrick, she's no longer in the band, but she is on this album that we're going to be discussing today. Her name is Lauren Leibowitz, but she goes by Lauren the Flute. And she does, she played the flute with the band called The Returners. I don't know if they still exist. This album, oddly enough, came out the same year as the Year 200X song that I was mentioning earlier. This is also a song from Final Fantasy VI. This is a medley of songs from it. The album's called Immune to Silence. They both came out in 2014, but tied into the band that we're speaking of today, I just thought I would throw those out there because I had never heard them before. I discovered them this week, just kind of diving into this band, and I really enjoyed those two tracks. So they will be on future playlists of mine, Volume 20 and Volume 21, respectively. But like I said, if you want to jump in and listen to them prior to us posting that, I would recommend that you do.
Well said. And it's funny because this is a band, Descendants of Erdrick, that I first heard many years ago. And the second I heard this band, I thought, oh boy, this is something you need to hear. So I was happy to bring it to your attention. And here we are all these years later getting to talk about them in long form. I'd have to assume for the first time. I don't know that this has ever been done by anyone else before. But honestly, this is a band that, like I said, when I first heard it, I just knew you would be into it. And here we are all these years later, and I think you probably like them just as much now as ever before.
Oh, without a doubt. I wish you know what? I might be able to just look through my iTunes, and if I sort by the date that I added them to my library, I might be able to figure out what the first thing I had heard. It looks like it's hard to say because I think I went onto their Bandcamp page and just bought the 3 albums that they had available. This was back in 2014. It seems to be the year that I keep bringing up for some reason. And then later on in 2016, there was they had done a Chrono Trigger tribute album that was, I think, I don't know if OC Remix had anything to do with it, but it was called Chronicles of Time, and they did a track on that album as well. So I pretty much went out of my way to find any and all material by this band, just because as soon as I heard it, I just loved how they married the hard rock / heavy metal sound with some of my favorite tracks from games that I've played over the years, and I'm almost positive that you were the one who brought them to my attention. I will point out that if you're looking to listen to this album that we are going to talk about, called Thanks a Million, which came out in 2012, I would point you to their Bandcamp page. It's descendantsoferdrick.bandcamp.com. And you can actually get the album free of charge because it's no longer in print. So they just let you have it for free, which is pretty cool. But it's not on Apple or Spotify or anything like that. Their most recent album, Advent, which came out in 2014 and is all songs from RPGs and adventure games. So, you have your Link to the Past, Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior, ActRaiser, that kind of stuff. That one is on the streaming sites and on iTunes and stuff like that. But for whatever reason, these first two albums are not, and so you can get those from their Bandcamp page. I just didn't want people to not be able to listen to it if it was something they wanted to listen to before they listen to the rest of the episode or after. That is where you can find it, because I don't know how much of this stuff is even on YouTube, to be honest with you. I know they have some cool live videos, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
And I'll put the links to the Bandcamp below. So if you're looking for that, it should be an easy find for you. Just look below. They're out of Austin, Texas. They classify themselves as a video game music tribute band, but anyone that listens can immediately hear the hard rock and metal influence is on this. In fact, they even describe themselves as a progressive metal band doing video game music. And that's something I wanted to point out because it's actually something I hear through and through on a lot of these tracks. Just to kind of walk you through the band, or at least who recorded this album, you had mentioned Amanda Lepre on guitar, Mike Villalobos also on guitar, Chris Taylor on bass, Lauren Leibowitz, you mentioned, on the flute, and John Pike on drums. They did their own arrangements. They did their own mixing and mastering and engineering. They did their own cover art. So they really are kind of a one-stop shop when it comes to recording. And unfortunately, as you kind of alluded to, their last album came out in 2014. So it has been a while. I believe that's accurate. And to that end, I kind of hope that they come out with something new, because this was definitely enjoyable. My question for you is, why did you choose this album as opposed to any of the others? More just a curiosity before we get into it.
Yeah, sure. Also, before I answer, I just want to throw out that Mike Villalobos, who is no longer in the band, is actually a very successful Twitch streamer under the name Lobos Jr.
No kidding.
Yeah, he does Twitch full time, and I know Caleb is a big fan. That's where I had heard of him initially, so I just wanted to plug that in case you wanted to check out his Twitch stream. I believe it's just twitch.tv/LobosJR or Junior. But yeah, so the reason I chose this was, it was tough because their first album, Downright Heavy, which came out in 2010, has maybe my two favorite songs that the band does. The Dream Master's Nightmare, which is a medley of songs from Little Nemo the Dream Master, and Dave's theme from Maniac Mansion. There's also some really cool, there's a Street Fighter medley, a Mega Man 3 medley, which is one of my favorite soundtracks. But I think that, and I mentioned Advent, which is their most recent album from 2014, and that, like I said, is all role-playing and adventure-type games. I found that Thanks a Million was the most varied, had the most mix of game genres, and I think it's their most complete album, and probably has the most songs that I really recognized and really liked on a whole. Even though there might be some songs on the other two albums that I like more than some of the songs on this album, I just think this is my favorite album of theirs on a whole, and so that's why I chose it. But I definitely had to give it some consideration because it wasn't an obvious choice.
Good. I think that makes all the sense in the world. I am familiar with all of their material, although I think I'm familiar with some other cover bands that do the same type of style more. Daniel Tidwell comes to mind, and some others just in terms of the genre, the video game cover genre. But as I went back to this, I actually forgot how prevalent the flute is on this entire album. It just, for some reason, I just forgot how big of a part of the sound it is. And there are some songs, and we'll get into it, where the flute really drives the melody and it's kind of the lead instrument on some of these tracks. It's really fascinating. But like I said, with kind of setting the stage, not only are there 12 tracks, but a lot of these tracks are sequels to original games. And I don't know if that was done on purpose, and it's certainly not exclusive. There are some standalone games here, but you're talking about Zelda 2, Ninja Gaiden 2, Mega Man 2, Sonic 2, Double Dragon 2, on and on and on. It's like more than half the album is the second game in a series, and I found that just very interesting. I don't know that there was any rhyme or reason for that, because then you have other tracks which are either the first in a series or the fourth in the series, but it was just a very kind of interesting discovery when I went back and I looked at the track listing.
Yeah, it didn't really even dawn on me, but you're right. Yeah, half the tracks look like they're the second game in the series. I mean, even if you want to count the last track, it's from Final Fantasy IV, but it was known as originally as Final Fantasy II in the US when it was first released. So there's another 2 for you. But yeah, I don't know if that was done on purpose, or it was just a matter of these were the best choices that they wanted to make as far as games to cover. These are all games with outstanding soundtracks on the whole. The ones that I was not that familiar with, I actually went out of my way to listen to more of. There were probably just three. There were probably three tracks on this album that I wasn't super familiar with, and 4, I would say, from games that I have never really played.
And I think that's about the same for me. I'm kind of curious to see if it's the same. I have a feeling it might be, but
yeah, and we'll just kind of go through that as we make our way through the album. We'll talk about our kind of experience or lack thereof for each game, and how we feel about the music and what have you. But boy, it couldn't start out any better for me than with the track Return of Ganon, which comes from Zelda 2, which is my personal favorite NES game of all time. And I feel like I was vindicated in that choice, because I recently watched a video on YouTube. Let me just make sure that I give the correct credit where credit is due. This was a video made by Jason Graves. He also just recently, like last week, released a follow-up video 2 years later of his 100 top SNES games of all time. But he had Zelda 2 as his number one NES game of all time, which made me feel so good, because I know that there are people that game wouldn't even be in their top 100 list. It is a love it or hate it game. But I was absolutely fascinated by this game as a kid. And the only reason I say fascinated was because I wasn't good enough to play it until I was like a teenager. It was that difficult of a game. I beat the first Zelda way before the second one. But interesting thing about this game is that it's one of the only early Zelda games, or at least any of the Zelda games from the 90s or 80s, that was not composed by Koji Kondo, who is the mastermind behind the original Super Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda soundtracks. This game was a bit, even in its creation, was a bit off the beaten path. And Akito Nakatsuka was the composer for this game, and he had previously done the soundtracks for Excite Bike, Ice Climber, Clu Clu Land, and Devil World, which was a game that the great Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Legend of Zelda and Super Mario, made, that never made it over to the States. It was stayed in Japan, mostly because due to some religious iconography, which Nintendo of America was very careful of leaving out of their games. But he also had a hand in the Punch-Out soundtrack as well, which I know that you have very fond memories of. So this is a a cool medley of. I mean, this Zelda 2 didn't really have a ton of songs in it. You have the title screen, the map screen music, the battle music, the temple music, and that's pretty much all the songs that are in Zelda 2. What did you think of this medley, and how familiar were you with the music from this game?
So I had the game as a kid, but I was terrible at it, so I never made it very far. I remember being at your place a few years ago and watching you with my jaw on the ground as you just navigated this game like it was nothing. And I don't think in all these decades I will ever get to that point. So I had heard the soundtrack just by watching you play the game more than anything else, because a lot of it I had never gotten up to for one reason or another. What I like about what Descendants do is that they take these soundtracks and they basically splice pieces of the soundtrack together into these medleys, which somehow seem to work. And you would think in certain cases it might be a little jarring, and I guess it is, but for the most part they weave in and out of these songs seamlessly. So kudos to them. Zelda 2 is a bit of an outlier of a game, not just for the reasons you mentioned, but it just plays differently than a lot of the other games. So I guess it's kind of fitting that the soundtrack would be different too. But like, a really underrated soundtrack for one of the more simple games. I mean, we're going back to 1987 here. I like how the flute plays like a really nice complement to the guitars on this, and the drums and the bass have like a really epic feel, which I think is kind of the same way I feel about the game soundtrack, but it's just obviously not as pronounced. A good opening track, not my favorite, but quite good, and I was familiar enough that there was a bit of a nostalgia feel here.
Awesome. I think the music from the palace theme, I think that got a lot of it got a lot more popular through the Smash Brothers games, because this was the music that was typically used in the Hyrule stages, and so I think that kind of shone the spotlight on it. It's arguably one of the best compositions in the game, outside of I think the title music is phenomenal. But yeah, this is, again, like one of my favorite games of all time. Choosing a song of the week is a damn near impossibility. I'm not going to choose this, although it could very well be. But yeah, this is just a really awesome journey through, like you said, all the songs from the game. I think the only other cover band that I can think of off the top of my head it's really just a guy who goes by the name of Vomitron, and he, as far as I know, was a member of the band Armory, who was, I think, from the New England area. They were a power metal band. I'm pretty sure they are at least on hiatus, if not broken up, but he released 3 albums of just NES covers, and literally whatever game it was, he does every song in the game, and the same way where it all kind of flows together in a really cool way. Same thing here. It moves on to the second track, which is called Hard to Beat, and it's from Ninja Gaiden 2, and for anyone who's played the Ninja Gaiden games, Hard to Beat is a pretty good way to describe them. I believe you are more familiar with this series of games than I am, so I'm going to give you the floor on this one.
I had the original game, and I loved it. I spent countless hours as a kid playing the original. But I remember wanting this second game and even the third game in the series, but they were so damn expensive that I never actually had them. And now with the benefit of hindsight, I actually have them on like emulators and stuff like that, but I just never spent enough time with them, because when I want to get my fix, I always go back to the first game. So as much of a fan as I am of the original, I've never actually played more than maybe 5 minutes of the second version, which is, almost a new experience in a sense, just because when I was listening to the soundtrack, I'm like, I really don't have an affinity for it or like a nostalgia fact, because I just never played this game. But that being said, it's a really cool song. I love how it starts out with just the flute and the bass. They go so well together, and you can see how it's just kind of, when the band kicks in, it just kind of builds steam, and it has like this slow build to this big payoff. And it was a little startling to me how many leads the flute had on this particular track, but there's these proggy guitar solos that I like, and I like how the song just gets faster and faster. It inspired me to want to go out and play this game now after 35 years of not playing it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. There are 3 NES games of the Ninja Gaiden series. All of them are supposedly very difficult. But the music that I've heard, I don't know that I've heard much from the 3rd game, but the music I've heard from the first 2 games is excellent.
Yes.
Really good stuff. This is no different. This was one of the games that I was just not familiar with. The soundtrack I was not super familiar with, really, outside of this literal track. But I listened to it a bunch more times this week, and this sounds like this would be just a fun game, just from a listening standpoint. Maybe it'd be more fun to watch somebody who's good at it play it, much like you did with Zelda 2. But I like this a lot. There's a song, and my understanding is that like this game, the stages are like acts. There's like Act 1-2 or Act 3-1 or whatever, and so I don't know what's what, but in the middle of the song, there's this really fast paced clip with the flute is just like blisteringly fast. I don't think I've ever heard anyone play a flute that quickly before, and the thing that I think is really cool about the flute playing, which you had, mentioned, is that, we talk a lot about bands that have prominent keyboards, and how, the keyboard almost can be a lead instrument and take away, and kind of take the place of the guitar, where the guitar will be more of a rhythm situation. I feel like the flute for this band is kind of like their version of the keyboard, where it's just as important to the proceedings as the lead guitar. And I think that's really cool, because how often do you hear that in any sort of rock or metal type music, where this
might be the only place. I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't know that I've heard it anywhere else.
Yeah, we'd have to talk to Carl Cadden James and see how he feels about that as one of the few. I also believe Sarah from Mind Maze has played the flute on stage with the band as well. But I mean,
but you're talking about isolated tracks. You're not talking about an entire album.
Yeah, this is just this. It's part of the heart and soul of the band, and I definitely recommend checking out some of their live videos, so you could see just how kick-ass Lauren is playing the flute with this band. It's really cool, and just a very it was off-putting to me when I first heard this band, because I'd never heard anything like it before, and now it's like it makes so much sense to me. It's so cool, and so I'm not going to harp too much on that, because it's pretty much like that all the way through this album. But I just think that I don't know, this track is really, really cool, and probably my favorite of the ones that I wasn't that super familiar with going into it. Just it sounds like this game has a really killer soundtrack just based on this medley.
And so obviously this was a game we both hadn't played. If I'm being honest, the next track is from a game I had never heard of, and this track is called To the Underground Concourse. The game is called Journey to Silius. It came out in 1990 on Nintendo. I had never heard of this game, as I said, and apparently it was based off the early Terminator film in 1984. That was brand new to me. I had no idea what to expect from this song, because I was just so not familiar with it. But what's interesting is that when the song finally gets going, some of the riffs had like a Metallica black album vibe to it, like Metallica circa 1991. It was really interesting. So think of like something you'd hear on the Black Album, just with flute behind it. It was really cool. And what's interesting is, having never heard any of the soundtrack, I can almost hear the soundtrack as I listen to the song. So I feel like if I was to go back and play the game, I would almost know what those, Primitive's 8-bit sounds would actually sound like, even though I've never played it. It's a little bit dry, although I have to say the last minute and a half or so is just complete chaos, but in a beautiful way. So it does pick up nicely. But the highlight to me are the drum fills. The drums on this track are just absolutely outstanding. And I'm wondering if you, A, share the thoughts, and B, have you ever heard of this game prior to this week?
Only thanks to Nintendo Power, which was a magazine that I used to get as a kid. I remember hearing of it. I knew nothing of it. I never, even to now, I don't know anything about it. But the aforementioned Vomitron also covered the songs from this game. So I did a little digging, and it turns out that this is a very well received soundtrack from the NES days. The composer is Naoki Kodaka, and he was known for making or composing soundtracks for games made by Sunsoft. And so, he had done Spy Hunter and Freedom Force and Blaster Master, which a lot of people probably remember. Platoon, which was a game I remember Mike had. Fester's Quest, Batman the video game. So, these were all the games that he had worked on prior to Journey to Silius. Then years later, he would do work on the Albert Odyssey series, which I believe was I guess it started out as a SNES series and made its way to the Saturn. So it's funny. I went into YouTube and went and listened to the actual 8-bit soundtrack to this game because I was curious. How often do you hear like a cover version of a game soundtrack and then go back and listen to the actual game soundtrack second? Right. So some of the comments are amazing. This is single-handedly the best NES song I've ever heard, and this game has other epic music as well. Sunsoft made the best music. Someone else said one of the most underrated soundtracks of the entire system. Personally, with this game's backstory, the gameplay, graphics, and sound, it's one of the greatest gems on the NES and is worth every second you play it. So like a lot of high praise for this game and its soundtrack. I'm super curious about it now. And I thought the band did a really great job with it. A fun comment someone made regarding the title theme was, whoever composed this clearly didn't know this was going to be used as a title theme, because it's just it's such an epic song. Like they were like, why, most games would just be like a 30-second song that would just repeat, and that they just like went ape.
Probably thought it was going to be used for something else in the game, and then they just kind of plucked it and put it up front.
Yeah, I kind of want to watch like somebody do a playthrough of this game to see what it's all about, and now we'd probably be pretty familiar with the music from it. But this is cool. It's kind of hard to like talk about these tracks in a general sense because, like you mentioned, there's like 4 to 6 songs that are being medleyed. That's a new word. Put it on a shirt. For each track.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not even really I'm not kind of walking through each one, because it's too arduous a task. I mean, like Mega Man 2, right? Like the next game we're going to talk about. The game came out in 1988, which I can't believe it was that many years ago. But I say that to say that each character in this game had a different song to it. So every single time, I mean, you're talking literally about an entire soundtrack condensed into 5+ minutes here. This track clocking in is just over 6. The track is called "Get Equipped with Metal," and Metal Man is actually, I think, one of the guys in the game. And I've beaten this game. This is one of the few games that I've actually beaten. And I think I did it during COVID, if I'm not mistaken. I went back and I played it, so I was very familiar with the music in this one. Really, really good soundtrack. And one of those early games where you're just like, wow, like the music just lends itself so well to some of these goofy characters that were, kind of in the game. I would argue this is probably my favorite song thus far. And I think the reason is just because it had that real metal vibe to it. So it was kind of in my wheelhouse. But just great guitar work, and the solos and the riffs are just awesome. So again, favorite track this far, and was in contention for Song of the Week for a bit too.
Can't blame you. For me, Mega Man 2 and Mega Man 3 are two of the very best NES. You know what? Scratch that. Two of the best video game soundtracks that I've ever heard. The only complaint I have about this is that they don't play all of the songs from the game. I mean, there's only so much time. I
have that gripe later. Believe me, we'll get there.
Yeah, they hit some of the some of the really good ones. But I mean, there are 8 individual stages in this game, and each one has its own theme song. Plus, when you get up to the Dr. Wily stages, there's at least 2 or 3 more theme songs there as well. But it starts with the title screen, and man, when that thing kicks off, that guitar solo, the guy who wrote this soundtrack, Takashi Tateishi, and he went by the alias Ogaretsu-kun. He obviously, I don't know, had some sort of like affinity for rock or metal music, because when this stuff is translated into, real live instruments, and not, an 8-bit synthesizer, you can tell that like this is definitely the most metal song on the album up to this point. The music from the Dr. Wily stage, which comes in at around the 3:45 to 4 minute mark, was one of the most iconic songs in the NES soundtrack era. If somebody was gonna like just listen to one song from this album to get a taste for what it is we're talking about, this might be the one I would point to. Really cool. It goes through a couple of the stages and then ends with the Mega Man 2 like ending theme. Just a really awesome medley altogether. And they do a really cool Mega Man 3 medley on the previous album, which I would also recommend just as highly.
Nice. And then we get into the first Sega game on the card on the disc, and it comes from Sonic 2. It's called The Fastest Thing Alive. Aptly named as well. Any thoughts on this? I know you aren't a Sega guy, but I have to assume that at some point you played Sonic 2.
Yeah, I definitely was not a Sega guy, but can I tell you, man, the soundtracks to Sonic and Sonic 2 are two of my all-time favorite game soundtracks. I listen to them fairly regularly. That's how much I like them. The composer was Masato Nakamura, who did the soundtracks to both the first and the second game. Kind of an urban legend is that Michael Jackson had a hand in the soundtrack for Sonic 3, but was basically told not to give him credit for it. I don't know if it would have been a conflict of interest with the record label or what. I think it kind of came out after his death that urban legend was in fact true. Which is really interesting, but that was just happened to be, of the 3 mainline Sonic games, the one that I never really played, so I don't know the music well at all. But man, the soundtracks to the first 2 games are phenomenal, and I think the soundtrack to Sonic 2 is even better than the soundtrack to Sonic 1, and that's saying something because the soundtrack to Sonic 1 is outstanding. They choose some really good tracks from this game. I'm trying to remember some of the names of the stages, but they, unfortunately can't hit them all. Casino Night Zone was one of my favorite ones that they didn't hit, unfortunately. But there's a cool rendition of the boss battle music towards the end of the song. But I love that first track from literally that first that first zone that you start the game on. I'm forgetting if it was Spring Hill Zone or if that was from Sonic 1.
I don't remember. It's funny. I never owned these games, but because I had friends that had them, I did play them from time to time. So I don't remember the levels, but I am familiar enough that the name escapes me, but I remember the songs themselves. And you're right. Both of these games had such good soundtracks. But I love this particular rendition of it. And I thought that the way the band arranged these songs from this game was just nothing short of fantastic, because it was tons of melody, so upbeat, and the musicality is just great. And I like the guitar and the bass just driving this thing along with the flute kind of as an accompaniment. And then about midway through, there's this guitar solo that just kind of sounds like a circus. And it reminds me of when Jordan Rudess does that thing on the keyboards where he just kind of goes off and does that like circus noodling. It really was like, I hate when Jordan Rudess does it, but it really hit the spot here. So kudos to Descendants of Erdrick. I actually enjoyed this one so much that I'm going to make it my song of the week. I had another one that I was thinking about, but I also think there's a possibility that you might choose it. So I'm just gonna jump in here. Let's play a little bit from the Fastest Thing Alive, and we'll come back and give our final thoughts before we move on.
We're gonna have to figure out which minute of the song to choose, because there's like at least three like very distinct parts of the song. So I'll let you make the call on that. But let's give a listen, and we'll come back.
Anyway, just one of my favorite medleys, if you will, on this album. Obviously, you liked it as well. What's kind of weird to me is that they go from Sonic 2, this really upbeat, melodic, fast songs, and then they go to Metroid, which is one of like the slowest, plotting in certain ways soundtracks. The Secret of Planet Zebes is the name of this particular track. It's an all-time classic game. I have played some of it. I've never played the entire thing. I find it to be frustratingly difficult, even as a middle-aged man. But like, what I liked about the cover is that it's slower, almost doomy. Like, I almost got like a Candlemass vibe, but meets outer space, which is kind of cool. But it's a bit of an odd arrangement for my ears. I think that when you mix the flutes and the guitars and the bass, and they seem like they're going in three different directions at the same time, I had a little bit of a jarring experience with this one. I do think it gets better as it moves along, and I think it's one of the proggier tracks that they do. But the second half is really where I kind of was able to sink my teeth into this a little bit more, because it's a little bit mid-paced, kind of has like a space rock vibe to it, and I think the main theme to the game is great, but I just wasn't 100% sold on this arrangement.
It took me like years to get into the Metroid soundtrack outside of the Brinstar theme, which is that really upbeat and pretty much the only upbeat song in this game, because everything else is really kind of dark and dreary, like you said. This soundtrack was originally written by the great Hirokazu, otherwise known as Hip Tanaka. He was like a hired gun that Nintendo had in their back pocket. He did the music for Wild Gunman, Duck Hunt, Hogan's Alley, Balloon Fight, Wrecking Crew, Gyromite, Gumshoe, Metroid, this game, Kid Icarus. He would do the soundtracks for Super Mario Land, for the Game Boy, Dr. Mario. He just was like this guy that they would go to. He is a legend in the gaming music world. This is a really, I think, ahead of its time soundtrack. This is a game that I've actually beaten before, but I agree with you. It's frustratingly difficult. It laid the groundwork for one of the greatest games ever made, Super Metroid, for the Super NES, and would eventually become the beginning of creating its own genre of games, where it would go on to inspire Castlevania to change their whole like how they built a game. Because with Symphony of the Night, which came out in 1997 for the PlayStation, they took the elements of the map building that Super Metroid had perfected, and they mixed that into a Castlevania world where you need to find a certain item in order to open up more of the map screen, and that became what was known as the Metroidvania genre. But anyway, the intro to Metroid is like this, dark and kind of creepy, outer spacey kind of song. The game starts out though with the Brinstar theme, which is just, I think, one of the catchiest tunes in game music. It's upbeat, and it's kind of cool because you're starting out this adventure, it's an adventure, let's go, kind of like road trip, and then as you get deeper into this planet, the music just gets darker and creepier, and it's kind of cool the way that they do that, and this medley kind of takes you on that journey, in my opinion. I don't remember the name of the stage that's pretty much the second half of this medley. I can't remember if it was Norfair or I don't remember the name of the stage. I think there's 4 major areas in this game, but they did the theme song for 2 of them plus the intro. It's not my favorite track on the album, but I really did learn to appreciate the darker and weirder tracks from this game. Probably just from playing it over the years, but this was one of those games I didn't have growing up. I played it later on as a teenager and as an adult. And I remember the last time I played it, I got up to Mother Brain and I just couldn't beat her, and I just gave up. And that was the last time I played Metroid.
Yeah, listen, I completely understand that. It's just frustratingly hard, but a classic in every sense of the word. And the next track, Metavian Medley, is from Phantasy Star 4. It's the second and last Sega Genesis game that they cover on this album. Another classic, and widely regarded as one of the best RPGs of all time. And I gotta be honest, after listening to the soundtrack, I've never played this game, but I'm not just going to play it. I think it's probably going to be the next game I play whenever that is. Really interesting vibe for 2 reasons. Number one, at first it kind of starts with that spacey Metroid feel, but it really does go into like other directions. And what's crazy is there are parts of this soundtrack that just remind me so much of Arion's Into the Electric Castle, not just because of the flute, but just because of the great bass lines and some of the way that the guitars are structured. I heard like this wonderful Arion album that came out, in I guess it was 97 or 98. That alone was enough to sell me on this game, because I just want to hear the soundtrack and see if it too bears a similar resemblance to the Descendants of Erdrick medley playing the game, if that makes sense. Again, I have to assume this was one of the other ones you haven't heard yet. Oh, definitely. I didn't know. I really don't know anything about Phantasy Star. I've heard of it because it was pretty much Sega's answer to Final Fantasy. This and the Shining Force series, I believe, were the 2 big RPG series on the Sega consoles. But one of the things you'll notice, I think,
on this album, there's I think five. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess 5 tracks from 16-bit systems, the Super NES or the Sega Genesis, and you can just tell that there's just more going on, because I think that the game composers had more freedom because they had more channels that they could work with, and the NES, I believe, only had 4 channels of sound, I believe. So you literally had like a bass line, a percussion line, and then 2 lines for your melody, and that was it. Really primitive stuff, and the 16-bit consoles, I think, opened things up. So I think that you can hear that there's more going on when a band like this is doing their kind of take on it. But yeah, the songs I heard on this medley make me very interested in checking out the game. Really good stuff. Especially there's a song towards the very end, the last like minute and a half, that was really like upbeat. The flute is, ever so prominent here, but this is really cool. I'm very fascinated. This would probably be, along with Journey to Silius, like I don't think I knew anything from either of these games, so this was a bit of an eye opener for me. But very cool track, and I like this a lot. And it's too bad you're not a streamer, because I would totally watch you play this game.
Well, maybe we'll have to fix that, but unfortunately, I'd be going at such a snail's pace that I don't think you'd enjoy it, just because I don't have that much time to play. But I did enjoy the soundtrack. I will play it eventually for sure. And like I said, I'll put it in my queue next. What was really kind of interesting to me about this album is that it finishes with 5 classic games, the first of which is Double Dragon 2. The song is called Force of the Dragon. Here's another example of me owning the original and just never owning the second one, although, again, I had friends that had it, so I did get to play this game as well. I am a big fan of this type of fighting game. I love games like Final Fight and stuff like this, and this was really a precursor. This and Golden Axe, I think, were the 2 big precursors to Final Fight. Great music. I almost forgot how good the soundtrack was. One of the more underrated soundtracks, I think, on Nintendo. And what I love is, not only is it upbeat, but it has that really 80s vibe, almost like a movie where you just kind of want to scuffle, right? You just want to kind of get into it. There's like this little bridge section. I don't know what board it is from the game. It was a little mundane to me, but the rest of the track is so good. Lots of flute leads, but also lots of guitar noodles that just seem to lend itself well. Overall, a fan of this one, and another game that I really should go back to, because I do love the original.
Yeah, I played this and the original probably pretty evenly over the years. Over time, I've actually grown to like the second Double Dragon more than the first one. A lot having to do with how much I absolutely love the soundtrack. It is one of my favorite soundtracks. I'm actually going to make this one my song of the week, and I don't even know where I'm going to begin to choose a minute of this. There are so many good parts. But yeah, I am a big fan of the soundtrack. Kazunaka Yamane is the composer, and it's funny because it says that most of the music he wrote was used in beat-em-ups, and he highly favored the electric guitar. And I think it's pretty clear here that this music was, meant to fit, an electric guitar kind of vibe, and I think that the Descendants of Erdrick taking it and kind of almost like returning it to where it probably sounded like in this guy's head when he first composed it. It's kind of an interesting point of view. But let's give this one a listen, and then we'll come back and talk some more.
a good choice. I'm not sure if it was the one I would have necessarily picked for you if I had to guess, but I can certainly see why it's probably in the top half for me, if not the top third of songs on this album.
It's funny. I posted something a while back, and I can't remember if it was on the Metal Exchanges group. It might have been, but it was the fact that the level 2 of this game, the rooftop board, that the song had this weird. It sounded like "Easy Lover" by Phil Collins and Philip Bailey, and so. Trying to see if I'm not the only, lunatic, I Googled it, and sure enough, somebody else must have thought that because they did a mashup of the two on YouTube. So it wasn't just me. But of my favorite songs from this game, I think they used all of them.
Well, maybe that's why then. That makes sense.
Yeah, especially the fight with the shadow boss that's at the very end of the game. Wow, what an underrated NES track. It pretty much is the end of the song. But if I don't know, I might have to. That might be the minute that I choose to play because I think that just is such an awesome song. And so yeah, this is really good. I think between this and F-Zero were going to be my choices for Song of the Week, but man, any of these last 5 tracks really could have been it. They really finished strong on this one.
Yeah, and they picked great games, but they picked some interesting. Let's just say they made some interesting choices, right? Because now we get to Castlevania 2. Love the title. What a horrible night to have a curse. And if you've ever played the game, it makes perfect sense. This is another game that I had as a kid, and I just found it impossible. But I would play it over and over as a kid just because I thought the music was so good that even though I didn't know what I was doing, it just drew me back in. And this was one of the first soundtracks I really fell in love with. I would argue that this franchise has some of the best music of any games ever, and Castlevania 2 is no different. But what I found interesting is that arguably the best song in the game was not used in this medley, and that's Bloody Tears. They play a little bit of the guitar solo from it, but it's just not a driving force in this particular medley. And I listened to it a bunch, and I just could not hear them play this section of the soundtrack, which I was shocked by because I would argue it's one of the best pieces of music in any game ever made. And it's short. It's only about 40 seconds in the actual game, but for whatever reason, they just don't touch it here. In light of that criticism, the soundtrack is so good that there was enough stuff that it didn't matter. This is a great composition, some fantastic bass lines, really, really proggy time signatures. You just tap along to the whole thing. And even though the game is just impossible, the soundtrack is so good that you just want to play it.
I would point you to What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse, Part 1 from the Downright Heavy album, and you might find what you're looking for on that track. I believe that this one, What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse Part 2, I want to say is from Castlevania 2.
Correct.
And the medley on the first album is from Castlevania 1, so I believe.
Because Bloody Tears, definitely Castlevania 2, because I know it from the game. But for some reason, they just didn't include it in this composition. But, I for whatever, artistic license, maybe they did it differently.
Yes. Okay, so I'm with you there. I never played Castlevania 2, and it was one of those games that got a lot of flack for messing with a good formula. The first Castlevania, albeit difficult, is widely regarded as one of the great all-time NES games, and they went a different route on this one, much the same as Super Mario and Zelda did as well with their second releases. It's interesting to me that they decided to really kind of change it up with a bunch of different game series back then, because it's easy to say now like what a classic formula is for a game series, but at the time when there's only one game to choose from, who's to say what a Castlevania game is supposed to be or what a Zelda game is supposed to be? And it just seems that in the case of all three of those game series, when the third game came out, they went back to the well or the style that they went with in the first game. But one thing that you cannot take away from Castlevania 2 is that its soundtrack is awesome. And the Castlevania, pretty much every Castlevania game I've ever played or ever heard a song from has such great music. Symphony of the Night might be the peak of not just Castlevania music, but just game soundtracks.
I agree. I agree completely.
That's, I think, something that we'll have to just discuss one day.
Standalone episode on that soundtrack. In fact, it was recommended. I know I know that has come through. I think it was Keith, one of our Patreon members, had recommended that one, and with good reason. It deserves the discussion in its own right because it's that good.
Yes, agreed 100%, and that'll happen at some point. But I really like this a lot. Again, these old NES games, I don't know that I have the patience to, get good, as the kids say nowadays. So I might be more inclined to just watch somebody else who's actually good play them, and I can enjoy the music without having to die a million times and have my blood boil because I'm just getting too old for that kind of stuff. And, stick me with my easy RPGs, turn-based RPGs any day. Anything that involves actual timing and skill. Don't get me started on Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I don't think I had the reflexes to play that game in my prime, never mind at 41 years old. But I'm curious, what was your thoughts about Castlevania 2 as a game? Did you find that it was that you didn't like the departure from the first game, or did you not know the first game and only knew the second game? So what's your kind of history with the series?
So I had this one, but I never had the first one, so I didn't know anything else. To me, this was Castlevania, and it was only going back in time and playing the others that I saw that this was in fact an outlier. But I didn't hate it. It was just different, even in retrospect. But it didn't matter because the songs were so good that I've watched walkthroughs of other people much better than I, and it was really truly satisfying to see this game to its conclusion. Although if you gave me 100 years, I don't think I would have figured any of that stuff out without, help. So anyway, interesting stuff. One of these days we will do Castlevania, Symphony of the Night just because it's so different. But we get to a run of Super Nintendo games here. A racing game and two RPGs, the first of which is F-Zero, Mute Blue, Silence Field. A game that I have played, but I need to go back to it because it's been a long, long time, but an absolute classic. And what was kind of interesting to me about this is that more than any other track, it had a power metal feel to it. And I think that that's probably why you're going to like it as much as you do. But the way that these arrangements were made, it was really great drumming, great solos. And it was just, I don't know, it just had a power metal, feel to it. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you don't love this.
Oh, yeah. This was a launch game for the Super NES, along with Super Mario World, which came packed in with the system, and Pilot Wings. And F-Zero and Pilot Wings were looked at as almost tech demos for the console to show off the Mode 7, as it was called, which was kind of like a rotating graphical technique that I don't believe the Genesis was capable of doing, at least not at that point in time. But F-Zero turned out to be like a really super fun, blazing fast racing game. Probably the only real complaint about it is that it was only a one-player game, which was rectified several weeks ago when they made a battle royal game for the Switch called F-Zero 99, where you race an F-Zero against 98 other live players. And it is absolutely chaotic, and it's a lot of fun.
I didn't even know that was a thing. That's hysterical.
Yeah, it's awesome. In those 16-bit graphics, but widescreen, looks super cool. I highly recommend if you have a chance to watch somebody play it or play it yourself. It's a blast. But one of the interesting things about the F-Zero series is that, yes, the songs are always very guitar driven, and as a matter of fact, when the sequel came out for the Nintendo 64, F-Zero X, which I believe came out in 1998 or 1999, in Japan they released a guitar like a real guitar version of that soundtrack that wasn't synthesized. That was because if you haven't heard it, you have to listen to this.
Yeah, I have it. It's fantastic. I mean,
it's awesome. There's only 2 songs from the original F-Zero that are reused in F-Zero X, Big Blue and Mute City, which are the first 2 tracks, or the first 2 songs used in this medley. But so this opens up with the title theme, then it goes into Mute City, Big Blue, which is one of the all-time great video game songs, and just begging for a real electric guitar solo, and it's done so well here. That goes into Silence, which is one of the more like mellower tunes, but yet really cool. And then going into the final song, Firefield, which is like anxiety. And if you ever played the stage, it's the last stage in the game. It's very difficult and very angsty. So the music, I think, really fits well. And there's just a really blazing guitar and flute together solo. This is really cool. This would be my runner-up for Song of the Week, without a doubt. If any of the metalheads who are wondering why the hell we're spending this time talking about video games, give this track a listen, and maybe you'll get the crossover appeal here.
Nice, well said. And then that brings us to one of your favorite games of all time, Chrono Trigger: A Time of Frogs and Fiends. I know you love this game. I'll let you do the honors before I chime in with my thoughts.
Yeah, so this game was like considered the like holy grail of RPGs. It came out in 1995 for the Super NES, and it was what they called the people who put this game together were called the Dream Team, because there were people from the Final Fantasy series and people from the Dragon Quest series, all coming together to make this game. All the artwork was done by blanking on his name, from Dragon Ball Z fame, and he did all of the artwork for Dragon Quest. Akira Toriyama. Toriyama. He did all the artwork. The game was the music was composed by both Nobuo Uematsu, who we'll be talking about in the next song, but mostly done by Yasunori Mitsuda. I'm pretty sure he does pretty much everything that's in this medley here. I believe Uematsu was brought in to finish the soundtrack because Mitsuda had fallen ill at some point. He contracted stomach ulcers.
Oof.
And so they brought in Uematsu to come in and finish things off.
Like Mariano Rivera coming in to close the game.
Yeah, for real. They actually do. This soundtrack is enormous. I believe it was 3 or 4 discs. The Japanese soundtrack. The Japanese were big on releasing video game soundtracks. Even in the NES days, you could buy a cassette or a CD of video game soundtracks. It was a much bigger thing. Do you remember going to one of the game stores and Nick buying the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack, but having to buy the Japanese import because that was the only way that you can get it? Nowadays, thankfully, you can go on to Spotify or iTunes and get it from there. But back then, you had to import, much like a lot of our metal releases back in the 90s, you had to import these, and they were expensive because they were like these 4-disc box sets that you'd have to import. But this was like the epitome. It was towards the end of the Super NES's run, but it's just the epitome of arguably the best RPG console of all time. Maybe the PS1 might be in contention as well, but it was designed by Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was like the guy behind the first eight or 9 Final Fantasy games. But yeah, this soundtrack is one of the all-time greats.
Every song on the soundtrack is so different, and I think that that's what makes this particular composition shine. Frog's theme, for example. I mean, what sounds like that? And then you have like the different battle themes, and just every area of this game had such a different feel to it because of the music, and I love how it just seamlessly goes into these different songs. This was nearly my song of the week. If I had to pick a runner-up, this would have been it. Every instrument gets a chance to shine, so all 5 of these band members really get a chance to kind of show their wares here, and they do a great job. If you've never played the game, stop listening to the podcast and go play the game. It's that good. But then again, I think I would make that same argument about Final Fantasy II, which is the next game, or Final Fantasy IV as we got it in the US. The song is called Lunar Battle Rush. I would argue it's maybe the best game in the series. I know that's sacrilege to say, but it's one of my favorites. If not, it's in the top 3 for sure. I don't know that I would say it's as good of a song on this CD as it was with Chrono Trigger, but it's really cool how they do the battle themes and some of the boss themes. It's just, for some reason, I don't think it flows quite as nicely, although each individual piece of this song is great in and of itself.
Very well said. I played these, I would say the big 3 SNES RPGs were Final Fantasy IV, known as 2 in the US, 6, known as 3 in the US, and Chrono Trigger. I played those games in that exact reverse order. I started with Chrono Trigger, then played Final Fantasy VI, then played Final Fantasy IV. I was always more of a Final Fantasy VI guy, but I'll say this. While I think the soundtrack to 6 is better than the soundtrack to 4, it's bigger, I think it's the best. It's arguably the best video game soundtrack of all time, in my opinion. The battle music in 4, for whatever reason, is so much better than in 6, and I don't know why. But a lot of the themes are the battle themes are in this medley, which makes this medley super awesome. And that includes the final boss theme, which is incredible. The battle with Zeramus, I believe, was the name of the final boss. But I think other than the intro, which is the Red Wings theme, not to be confused with the Detroit Red Wings. Shout out to Steve Yzerman. I think the rest of the song, the rest of the medley is all battle themes, and it's really pretty cool. You must have gotten a kick out of this one.
Oh, no, I definitely did. Again, I didn't like the actual composition. I just liked each piece of this song. I thought that the parts were greater than the sum together, if that makes sense, or however the hell that expression goes. But I have to fall on the sword here, because the song ends, and then there's this bonus section, and I'm racking my brain as to what this bonus track is, and I know it, and I just can't say it. So I'm going to let you do the honors and reveal what this bonus track is at the end of this song.
Do you know it as in, like, you have heard it from somewhere?
I've heard it. I know it. I just I can't tell you what it is. Okay,
this is a band putting a meme on an album.
Okay.
So there is a hidden track, which at this time bands weren't really doing anymore. As we've talked about, especially in our discussions about 90s, rock bands, alternative rock bands, the track just goes silent for a while, and then all of a sudden this track comes in, and man, I didn't realize this either, and I don't remember how I figured it out, but there is a legend known as the Cheetah Men, and the Cheetah Men was a game that was on this god-awful bootleg NES cart known as Action 52. It was a multi-game cartridge that supposedly had 52 different games on it, and they were all trash. And one of them was the Cheetah Men, which was probably a takeoff on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was around the time where everyone was trying to make their own anthropomorphic human-style animal ninja whatever. You had Biker Mice from Mars and Battletoads and whatever, and this was, I guess, their attempt at it. The game itself is notorious for being like unplayably bad. Like it's just the hit detection, all of it. It's like absolute trash. The joke is, why is it that the music, this song, is such a banger?
It's a great song
on this garbage ass throwaway game. It's so weird, and I have to find the I think it was on YouTube, the comment. I have to read some of the comments on YouTube for the original Cheetah Men theme song from Action 52, which the Descendants of Erdrick so brilliantly threw in as a meme at the end of their album here. Here we go. Here's some comments. Nakey Jakey says, shit goes hard as fuck. Great Potterland says, the contrast between music and gameplay has never been this big. Shivari says, I feel so sad whoever composed this cool song and it ended up in a horrible mess of a game.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, and one more. Fletcher Reed's Randomness says, you know how people often say the only good thing about so-and-so, they're usually exaggerating? In this case, this literally is the only good thing about this game.
Oh, that's awesome.
If you just want to have a laugh, go and just read the comments section on YouTube. Usually comment sections are such like, you just, the worst of the worst. This is absolutely brilliant. Pickle Jello says the composer is the most overqualified person to ever live for his job.
Wow. That's awesome.
And one more, and I'll read one more. Waluigi cult member 2539 says, you got $5 to build your Cheetah Men game. $100 good gameplay. $200 good controls. $5 good music. $150 an editor. So you can see where the $5 came from.
That's so funny.
It's so weird, and so at least there's some legacy here for this game. Besides it being terrible, there's a really cool song that people seem to enjoy. So I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I'm sure a lot of people probably didn't even realize that it's part of the rest of the song. This is not an 11.5-minute Final Fantasy medley, although that would have been nice.
What are you giving this, a scale of 1 to 10? I know it's kind of off the beaten path vis-a-vis what we usually talk about, but what are you scoring this? And why is it a 12?
I'm going to give it a 64 for in honor of the Nintendo 64. It's a good question because it's so unbelievably different from anything we've really ever discussed. It almost feels weird to rank it in the same fashion that we would normally, but I'll do my best. I'm going to give this a shit. It's hard. Why don't you go first, and I'll try to formulate it, because it's weird. I don't listen to this kind of stuff and think about it in the terms of like ranking it. It's because I enjoy the crap out of listening to this, but at the same time, it's like I feel like giving it the same score I gave Avantasia's Metal Opera Part 1 would almost be sacrilegious. So I don't think giving it a 10 is a really something I can do as much as I kind of want to.
I'll say
what about
this.
you?
I am ranking this not only based on enjoyment, but based on the fact that, they're really, in a sense, there's covers, right? So, like, I know what the original soundtrack and the soundtracks sound like for the most part. And then this was their interpretation of kind of blending all this together. So it's really hard to rate this, but I'm going to give it a 7. I enjoy it. It's an easy listen. I think that some of the tracks are a little bit jarring because either the flute was too prominent in certain spots, or they just left out things that I would have liked, or in other spots, perhaps they just, it didn't flow as seamlessly as I'd like. But by and large, every track is enjoyable, right? So I'm going to give it a 7. I do like their stuff, and I certainly quite frankly, I want to go back and listen to their other albums because it's been too long. But I have a hard time putting it into that 8+ rarefied air area. So I don't know if that helps or if that just solidifies your 64 score, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm just going to give it an 8.5. I mean, it's just something that I really, really enjoy listening to. And honestly, outside of Vomitron, who I mentioned earlier, they're my favorite video game cover band. I would definitely put a shout out to Vomitron as well. No NES for the Wicked, NES Evil, and Righteous NES are the 3 albums, and all NES games, and just really, really well done. The production, for what I assume is just one guy, is so crisp. Really cool stuff. Maybe we'll post one of the tracks from Vomitron during the week. Terrible name for a band, by the way, but awesome music. I hope that there is a 4th album in the future, because I want to hear his take on probably 3 of my favorite NES soundtracks: Maniac Mansion, Little Nemo, and Mega Man 3, which he hasn't gotten to as of yet. But yeah, man, do I love video game music. And there's like so much stuff we didn't even talk about. So many great soundtracks out there. And we just kept it, Descendants of Erdrick just keep it in the 8 and 16-bit era. And there's just so much. Video game music's only gotten, I think, more, nowadays soundtracks are performed by actual musicians. It's not a lot, there's not a ton of synthesized music anymore, which is really cool, I think. I even think, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which we had mentioned earlier, that we'll talk about in long form in the future, was one of the earlier soundtracks, because it was a disc-based game, that to actually have real musicians playing instead of synthesized music. There's some really killer guitar riffs and solos on that soundtrack. So yeah, this was really fun. I'm so glad we got to talk about this. I apologize if I was a little bit, babbly, but
no, your passion shines through.
This shit is my bread and butter, man.
I should have just let you go and listen. I would have been entertained, but going to scrap the news this week because we went long. We were about an hour and a half already, which is awesome. But we're going to scrap the news this week. I want you to reveal what we're doing next week, because October rolls on and we get a little wilder and crazier here. But we have some special guests joining us next week.
Yeah, I can't think of even more out of this out of the realm of what we do. Going from Descendants of Erdrick back to a band that we discussed previously, and this episode that we had done is the reason that we now are friends with the guys that were going to join us next week. So it all kind of comes full circle. And what I'm talking about is the band The Monkees. When we covered their album Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited, thank you. They were ahead of Fall Out Boy when it came to wordy titles. It was the fact that Carrie of the MSR cast is such a big Monkees fan. So, his partner Sean was like, "Hey, do you know that there's a couple of guys that do a metal podcast that happen to do an episode on the Monkees?" And that got his attention. And they reached out to us, and it was funny because Sean loved that I was such a big fan of Power Quest, and Carrie loved that I was such a big fan of the Monkees, and they really enjoyed our podcast, and we really enjoyed their podcast, and they came to join us to talk about Merciful Fate, which, was that last year, earlier this year? I can't even remember when that was. But anyway, how this all came about was that for a while, myself and Carrie were battling each other in a game called Hurdle. And if you've played Wordle, as pretty much everyone has, you have to guess a 5-letter word, and you have 5 chances to guess it. Well, somebody came up with the idea of Hurdle, where you have like 2 seconds to hear the beginning of a song, and you have to guess what it is. And if you can't guess it on the first try, they give you a few more seconds. And then if you can't guess it after 5 segments of the song, well, then you don't get it. and somebody had created a Monkeys hurdle, and every day there would be a new song, and me and Carrie would trade our scores, and he would usually smash me. But he is like the Monkeys master. Like, I am a big fan, but he knows every song. And one of the things that came up was that I just was not familiar with their 1996 album Justice. It's spelled Justus, and it's pronounced Justice, but the wording is that it's just us, meaning that it's just the four Monkeys. There's no outside musicians. They all wrote all the songs, which, if you know anything about the Monkeys, you know that none of that is common for them. And
sure.
we talked about a lot of it in that previous episode. So feel free to dive back into the archives and check that out. Shit, I might have to do that because I don't even remember what we said. That was a while ago. Anyway, so the 1996 album, it was the first album with all four members of the band together again since 1968 or 1969, I believe, and I just was never really familiar with it. There's a song that was re-recorded from back in the 60s. That song I knew. A couple other songs, but for the most part, I just was not familiar with this album. And Carrie was like, "It's a really good album. You should listen to it." And he came up with the idea, well, maybe we should do a podcast and drag Justin and Sean in on this. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. So next week, we're joined by our friends from the MSR cast, Carrie and Sean, to talk about the Monkeys' 1996 album, Justice. So yes, just when you thought the Metal Exchange was getting weird in October, it gets even weirder. Yeah, I can't top any of that. This is going to be interesting, to say the least. We've done classic Monkeys, and then we now get to do some forgotten Monkeys from 1996. So it'll be interesting, to say the least. But thanks, everyone, for listening. Like I said, we appreciate the support. We hope you like this little pivot, and we hope you like next week's pivot as well. And then Lord only knows what I'm going to choose the following week. So time will certainly tell. We're gonna watch the pivot episode of Friends. There you go. I like it. It's just going to be a pivot month. Enjoy, my friend. This has been a blast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I think I can speak for all of us when I say that your passion shines through. So passionate. I will talk to you soon, my friend. Take care. Je ne sais quoi.